Imagine, imagine you are an art restorer, right? And you get brought in to look at this very famous centuries-old painting.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
And for literally hundreds of years, everyone, I mean, the whole world, has thought this masterpiece depicted this fiery, chaotic battlefield.
Right, like it's globally famous for that specific dark imagery.
Exactly. But as you start to carefully, strip away the thick layers of varnish and all the heavy touch-ups added by later generations, you realize something pretty shocking.
Which is?
The original artist didn't paint a battlefield at all. They painted a vibrant, thriving garden.
Oh, wow. So the entire narrative was just fundamentally changed by the people who painted over it centuries later.
Exactly. And you are listening to The Deep Dive, and today we are basically stepping into the shoes of that art restorer.
Yeah, we are.
We are digging into a really fascinating lecture transcript from the YouTube channel Kenosis. Specifically, this is Biblical Humanities Lecture 132.
Right, the one featuring Pastor Gildong Mo and Jin Sang Sam.
Yeah, that's the one. And the mission of this deep dive today is to explore how this specific source radically reinterprets some of the most, mainstream foundational Christian concepts just by stripping away that interpretive varnish.
Because the core premise we are unpacking today is the idea that over thousands of years, these basic biblical texts have been entirely severed from their original historical and cultural context.
Right.
And because of that separation, well, we've ended up with modern interpretations that often entirely contradict the original message.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. And as the lecture points out, these aren't just, academic misunderstandings. These historical misinterpretations have caused very real, very tragic harm in the real world.
Yeah, and really quickly, it's so important to note for you listening that we aren't looking at this to debate theology or take sides today.
Absolutely not.
We are not endorsing these religious views, and we aren't criticizing them either. We are purely analyzing the mechanics of the historical arguments presented in this lecture.
Right, just looking at how these massive shifts in translation actually happen.
Exactly, and what the texts look like when you read them through their original ancient lens.
So we're really just looking at the cause and effect of interpretation. Like, how did a message designed for a very specific ancient audience transform into something totally unrecognizable today?
And what are the practical implications of returning
Yeah,
to that original framework?
exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to really show how drastically this source deviates from popular understanding, I want to start with the biggest, most cinematic concept out there.
Oh, I know where you're going. The end of the world.
Yes, eschatology.
Yeah.
When you hear things like the end times or the apocalypse, pop culture and mainstream theology give us a very specific, highly visual narrative, right?
Oh, yeah. It's all fire and brimstone.
Exactly. The physical planet is completely destroyed, it burns up, and salvation essentially means your soul escapes this doomed planet and flies off to a spiritual heaven.
It's basically the ultimate cosmic evacuation plan.
Right, a cosmic evacuation plan.
Yeah.
But reading through this lecture, I have a massive logical pushback, and it's actually one the source itself brings up.
Let's hear it.
Well, if a divine creator designed and built the physical universe, why would the ultimate goal be to just burn the whole thing down?
Right. It doesn't really make sense.
No. I mean, if an architect builds a masterpiece, burning it to the ground implies the original design was a complete failure.
What's fascinating here is how the source completely upends that evacuation narrative by just looking at the original language.
Yeah, how so?
So the counter-argument presented in the lecture is that the end, mentioned in these ancient texts, is absolutely not about the physical destruction of the planet.
Okay.
It is about the end of sin. It's the eradication of evil and suffering, not the eradication of the earth itself.
Oh, wow. So it's a completely different kind of ending.
Entirely. The source uses a really grounded analogy to explain this mechanism. Think about the institutions of law enforcement, the police, the court systems, the prisons.
Okay.
Their ultimate idealized goal isn't just to catch and punish people in an endless loop forever, right?
I mean, ideally, no.
Right. The true goal of a perfectly functioning justice or education system is to eradicate bad behavior and crime entirely.
Wait, so building a society so healthy that you literally don't need prisons anymore.
Exactly. You want to build a society that is so functional that you can board up the prisons and disband the police force because they're just no longer needed.
Okay, so the goal isn't to destroy the city. The goal is to perfect the city so that the mechanisms of punishment are obsolete.
You nailed it. The source argues that religion's ultimate goal is exactly the same. the complete and permanent eradication of evil from this physical world.
Not escaping the world.
No. When mainstream interpretations talk about the physical world burning, they're completely missing the original philosophical point. The end is simply the end of the current, broken, corrupt system of human reality.
Which means, and this is a huge shift, we also have to completely redefine what the words salvation and resurrection mean in this context.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if the physical world isn't being destroyed, then that whole idea of an evacuation plan just falls apart.
Right. And the source actually points out that the concept of an immortal soul abandoning a decaying physical body to fly off to an ethereal realm, that's actually a Greek philosophical concept.
Really? Like from Plato.
Yeah, exactly. It comes from Platonism, where the flesh is seen as inherently bad and the spirit is good.
Interesting.
But the original Hebrew texts viewed the physical creation as fundamentally good. So in this view, salvation is participating in the resurrection, which doesn't just mean a dead body coming back to life.
What does it mean then?
It means the realization of the kingdom of God on earth.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it is a process of complete transformation. The source discusses the biblical concept of a new heaven and a new earth.
Right, I've heard that phrase.
Right. It's the transition from the realm of temporary time,
No.
where biological things decay, where we experience natural disasters, disease, systemic suffering, into a state of eternity.
So it's happening here.
Yes. The physical world, nature itself, and human society are brought to a state of absolute perfection right here in the physical realm.
Okay, but this brings up a massive historical irony to me.
What's that?
Well, if the ultimate design and goal of the faith, like according to this original context, is to perfect this world and eradicate suffering, why has the religion historically caused so much violent conflict?
That is the million-dollar question. And the source dives right into the tragic history here.
Yeah, like we see the Crusades, we see the 30 Years' War in Europe between Catholics and Protestants.
Right. And the source points out a devastating detail about the 30 Years' War, actually.
What was it?
It didn't even end with true peace or theological resolution. The factions just fought themselves to a bloody standstill and called a truce simply because the populations were entirely exhausted.
Wow, so they just ran out of people to fight.
Basically, the theological hostility remained completely intact. They still viewed their neighbors as heretics who needed to be destroyed. They just lacked the manpower to keep killing them.
That is so grim. And honestly, we see the echoes of that aggression today, don't we?
We really do. The lecture highlights some extreme behaviors from modern believers.
Right, like people going into Buddhist temples and smashing historical statues or cutting down traditional village totem poles.
Or, screaming at monks on the subway that they're going to hell.
Yeah. It is this intense, aggressive exclusivity. And reading the source's take on this, I kept thinking of an analogy.
Oh.
Let's hear it. Taking these texts literally today is like finding a 3,500-year-old text message on an ancient phone, reading it and aggressively acting on it without having any clue who the sender was.
Right, or who they were texting.
Exactly. Or what the socioeconomic context of the world was at that exact second.
That is a perfect analogy. Because to understand that ancient text message, the source points us directly to the historical context of the first and second commandments.
Have no other gods before me, and do not make idols.
Exactly. In the modern era, those words are often weaponized as a directive to be aggressively exclusive.
All right, the interpretation becomes, our God is the only real one, yours is fake, and therefore we have a divine mandate to destroy your temples and convert you.
Yes, the classic interpretation of the jealous God who demands absolute loyalty and punishes anyone looking at another deity.
But the lecture argues we're misreading that.
Completely. The source argues that we are fundamentally misreading that jealousy because we are entirely blind to the economic and social realities of the world 3,500 years ago.
Okay, set the scene for us. What was going on?
Well, at that time in the ancient Near East, polytheism wasn't just a different flavor of personal spirituality. It was an exhaustive, crushing economic system.
Wait, an economic system?
Yeah. People worshipped dozens of gods for highly transactional, basic survival needs. You needed to appease a specific god for a successful hunt. You needed a different god for rain, another to prevent disease.
Oh my gosh, it sounds like an endless, terrifying bureaucracy.
That's exactly what it was.
Like, if a drought hits your village, you just assume the neighboring tribe's god is stronger. Or your local god is angry because you didn't sacrifice enough of your grain.
Right. It was a massive mechanism for wealth extraction. On a national scale, empires would waste staggering amounts of their own wealth and brutally pillage neighboring nations just to steal resources.
So to build giant temples and colossal idols, I'm guessing?
Exactly. They were locked in this literal arms race of idols to prove their local deity had supreme geographical power. The working class was continuously starved to fund these monumental building projects for the religious and political elite.
Wow. Okay, so when you look at it through that economic lens, the commandment saying, have no other gods and don't make idols, reads completely differently.
Doesn't it?
Yeah. It isn't a command for religious intolerance. It sounds more like an ancient socioeconomic intervention.
That's exactly how the source frames it.
Like, it was a command to stop participating in a predatory system. Stop wasting human life, destroying your national wealth, and starving your peasants to build golden statues in a pointless arms race.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the source suggests that God's jealousy isn't, the petty, insecure jealousy of a high schooler demanding attention.
Right.
It is the deep frustration and heartbreak of a parent watching their children continually destroy themselves.
Well, that makes so much more sense.
Yeah. The lecture mentions the multi-generational suffering caused by these false systems, like people making exhausting, physically destroying pilgrimages, taking 3 steps and bowing, all the way to a river full of floating corpses just to drink the contaminated water to seek a blessing.
Oh, that is horrific.
Right. So the divine heartbreak is over the sheer, pointless human suffering caused by these warped transactional systems.
So true monotheism, according to the source, it has absolutely nothing to do with screaming at people on a subway or burning down a neighboring shrine.
At all.
It is about living such an ethical, healthy, and exemplary life that people of other faiths look at your community and say, that is how a human being should live.
Exactly. It's supposed to be magnetic.
Right. You aren't forcing people to convert through fear of hell. Your life is supposed to be so demonstrably good, so beneficial to the community, that others naturally want to understand the foundation you build your life on.
Beautifully said.
But, okay, this creates another massive point of tension for you.
Yeah, what is it?
If the goal is to live a beautiful, exemplary life that betters the world, how did we arrive at a culture where believers think they need to suffer, be miserable, or abandon their own families to prove their devotion?
Yeah. The source spends a significant amount of time unpacking this exact tragic irony. Because when the interpretive paint gets thick enough, like your art restorer analogy.
Right, the original blueprint gets completely lost.
Exactly. And the results are emotionally devastating. The lecture shares a highly emotional anecdote that really anchors this point.
Yeah, here's where it gets really interesting. The speaker describes this 50-year-old woman who attended one of their seminars.
Right.
And in the middle of the teaching, she completely breaks down. Like, she is sobbing, physically beating her chest in grief.
Yeah, it's a really heavy moment in the transcript.
It really is, because through the teaching, she suddenly realized she had entirely ruined her relationship with her husband and her children. She had sold her belongings, drained her family's resources, and given everything away to build a, quote, prayer mountain facility.
Right.
She mistakenly believed that suffering, embracing poverty, and treating her family as secular distractions was exactly what God demanded of her.
Right. She thought she was achieving the highest level of spiritual devotion, only to realize the theology she was following had turned her into the villain of her own family's story.
Okay, but I have to push back on the source's logic here, though, using the very text they are analyzing.
Go for it.
Doesn't the New Testament literally say, and this is attributed directly to Jesus, that whoever loves their father or mother more than him is not worthy?
That is what the text says, yes.
So how does the source reconcile a woman weeping over her abandoned family with a text that seems to explicitly instruct her to abandon them?
This is where understanding the 2,000-year-old context of the first century is absolutely vital.
Okay, break it down for me.
The source argues that reading that specific verse with a modern literal lens produces the tragedy of the crying woman. But Jesus wasn't giving a literal directive to hate or abandon your family.
He wasn't.
No. The lecture explains that he was actually using sharp sarcasm and irony to fiercely criticize the corrupt religious leaders of his day.
Wait, sarcasm. So reading it literally misses the tone of the conversation entirely.
Completely.
What was the context that prompted the sarcasm then?
Okay, so in the first century, there was no governmental social security net. Your children were your retirement plan.
Right, it was their cultural and moral duty to care for you in your old age.
Exactly. However, the religious elite had instituted a legal loophole called korban.
Korban.
Yeah. This rule allowed people to take the wealth they should have used to support their vulnerable, aging parents and instead pledge it to the temple as an offering.
Wait, what?
Yeah. Once it was declared korban, it was supposedly dedicated to God and couldn't be used for secular purposes.
Like buying food for a starving mother.
Exactly like that.
Oh my gosh. It was essentially a religious tax shelter that enriched the temple at the direct expense of the elderly and vulnerable.
You've got it. The religious leaders created a system that prioritized funding their institutions over basic human compassion. So Jesus was fiercely condemning this practice.
Ah,
He was using irony to say, oh, so you're telling the public that if they truly love God, they should ignore their starving parents and give you the money. You think that makes them worthy?
wow. It was an indictment of a deeply corrupt system.
Exactly. The source makes it emphatically clear. Taking care of your family, meeting your immediate responsibilities, and practicing basic human compassion is the foundational, non-negotiable step of building God's kingdom.
Because you cannot build a spiritual utopia if you are functionally starving your own parents to fund a building project.
Precisely.
Man, that completely flips the script on what devotion looks like.
Wow.
Which brings us to another heavy concept the source redefines: martyrdom.
Right, this is a big one.
Traditionally, the definition of a martyr is someone who dies for their faith. Like, we think of the early believers refusing to burn incense to a Roman emperor.
Or individuals refusing to bow at a Japanese shrine during the historical occupation and being executed for their conscience.
Exactly.
And to be clear, the source deeply honors those who paid the ultimate price for their conscience in the face of state-sponsored violence.
Of course.
But it argues that the concept of martyrdom cannot remain static. In modern societies where the state isn't actively executing people for their religious beliefs, the calling evolves.
Evolve how?
We are no longer primarily called to die for our faith. We are called to a living martyrdom.
A living martyrdom. Okay, that sounds poetic, but what is the actual mechanism of that? Like, what does it look like in practice today?
According to the source, a living martyrdom means dedicating your life, your career, your energy, and your resources to solving real-world suffering, often at great personal cost.
Right.
It means looking at the physical world and identifying where the pain is and sacrificing your own comfort to stop it. The lecture specifically points to modern, massive-scale tragedies.
Yeah, it mentions the ongoing devastation between Russia and Ukraine and the endless generational conflicts in the Middle East.
Right, and it highlights the profound injustice of global hunger, where millions face starvation while wealthier nations struggle with obesity crises.
So instead of engaging in endless religious turf wars,
Right.
arguing about whose ancient texts are translated more accurately or, waiting around for an evacuation,
Exactly.
a living martyr is someone who leverages their life to stop actual wars, fix global supply chains, and feed actual people.
Yes. It is about actively constructing that perfected kingdom of God on earth we talked about at the beginning, rather than waiting for the planet to burn.
Wow.
And this raises an important question, right? And it is the profound conclusion the source ultimately lands on. It all comes down to examining the fruit of the tree.
The fruit of the tree.
Yes. The ultimate test of any belief system, whether it is a religion, a secular philosophy, or a political ideology, isn't how loudly its followers claim to possess the absolute exclusive truth.
What is the metric then?
The true metric is whether that system produces human beings who make the physical world demonstrably better. If the truth you hold on to makes you arrogant, aggressive, and disconnected from the suffering of your neighbors.
Then according to the framework of this lecture, you have completely misunderstood the original assignment.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? As we zoom out and look at this entire deep dive into the kenosis lecture, the core message is a massive challenge to the listener.
It really is.
The source is urging us to stop looking at ancient texts through a shallow, literal lens that strips away their historical reality.
Right.
It challenges people to stop using religion as a weapon for exclusion or, a ticket for an apocalyptic evacuation, and instead use these texts as a rigorous blueprint for ethical living that practically, tangibly betters the world.
It all comes back to that painting we visualized at the very beginning.
Exactly. If you put in the hard work to strip away the centuries of added paint, the centuries of human agendas, economic exploitation, and political power struggles,
Yeah.
you do not find a dark, chaotic battlefield.
No, you find a blueprint for a thriving garden, a guide on how to live fully, ethically, and beautifully right here, right now.
Right here. right now. And that leaves us with a provocative thought for you to ponder on your own.
Yeah.
If the ultimate measure of any belief system is the tangible quality of the life it produces, how might we audit our own core beliefs today?
That's a great question.
Regardless of our religion, our politics, or our deeply held personal philosophies, are our core beliefs genuinely making us better, kinder, more radically hopeful neighbors? Or are they just giving us a justified reason to build thicker walls?
Really something to think about.
It is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope we gave you something new to think about. And as always, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving into your sources. We'll catch you next time.